workshop, I should say, not meeting, this workshop, to order. And turn it over to Mr. Medancy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I start this evening, I just want to thank the team of administrators that are here this evening that have been a big part of the work that we're going to put before you. There was a lot of time spent and deliberation that occurs throughout this budget process, as you'll see within our presentation, that leads to our final product, which is tonight's proposal. I also just want to thank our town and elected officials that took time out of their schedules to join us this evening in hopes of better understanding the budget. Before I go into the presentation and hit the lights, I just want to read a brief statement. With a deep sense of responsibility and collaboration, I present the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year to you. This $123,614,448 budget represents a 6.6% increase, underscoring the immense challenges we have faced in balancing fiscal responsibility and our unwavering commitment to providing a first-class education for our students. The process of developing and finalizing this budget has been particularly arduous, shaped by several significant factors. Despite our best efforts to advocate for increased state and federal aid, the minimal support we continue to receive from these sources places a disproportionate burden on our local community. And you'll see within the proposed budget, I provided some data for folks, whether they have the summary or within our books that will be online, that kind of confirms that. Finally, higher than usual salary increases through recent collective bargaining agreements, rising health insurance premiums, and the implementation of a new transportation contract have further strained our financial resources. These challenges required us to carefully examine every line of our budget, making difficult decisions while striving to preserve the core programs and services that define our school system. Our goal throughout this process has been to ensure that the needs of our students remain at the forefront, even in the face of economic constraints. This proposed budget reflects our commitment to providing high-quality educational opportunities while remaining mindful of the financial realities faced by our community. Looking ahead, I am eager to continue working collaboratively with the Board of Education, town officials, and community stakeholders to adopt a budget that balances fiscal responsibility with the needs of our students and staff. Together, we can ensure that our district remains a place where students are inspired to excel, educators are empowered to innovate, and our community takes pride in its schools. Thank you. So I'd like to transition over, if I may, and I'm going to hit the lights, if that's okay.
Thank you.
So as part of our presentation this evening, there are several parts, but I want to just highlight kind of the flow of our presentation. It's important to remember kind of our core values and what we strive to do every day. And one of the things that this board adopted, along with community stakeholders several years back, was our vision of a graduate. And this continues to be something that we aspire to for our graduates in terms of, you know, the 21st century skills that we think are essential for them in order to be ready for career or higher education, whichever path they prefer to pursue. Additionally, some budget context. I think there are times that if you take budget information out of context, it might be misused. I want to provide an overview of the budget preparation process and some of the timelines and decisions that went in through. And then finally, an analysis in terms of what's included in this budget. So as I mentioned, our vision of a graduate is essential to all the work we do. It's how we measure progress of our students. It's how we develop and write curriculum. It's how we assess our students. And it's what we train our professional staff to promote and teach daily so that our students have assured experiences relative to these 21st century skills in the classroom. This year, our total student enrollment is 6,161 students, which pretty much aligns right now in a pretty steady basis. It is down slightly from last year. One of the questions we often receive is, if you have less students, why aren't we seeing substantive decreases in your operating budget? And if you even took 50 students as an example, given that we operate roughly 300 classrooms every day, that's a net of less than one student per classroom if they were dispersed across those 300 classrooms. We know those 50 students aren't all coming from two classrooms or one school. They are spanning across all of these schools, and 12 grade levels. So the difficulty in reducing staff when you have such a nominal amount of difference, if you will, each year, is just in the distribution of those students. And that goes the same for an increase. If we are increased by 50 students to 100 students, we don't often request increases commensurate with that enrollment because, again, it may be a net of one student in one class or 3 students in another class, depending on the distribution. But I think that's important information. As we look at a snapshot, as was shared with this board a couple meetings back, our demographics remain, somewhat consistent. Our 4-year graduation rate and our chronic absenteeism rate, the graduation rate has always been a source of pride, I think, for our community. We have an outstanding graduation rate. But I also think if you look at the chart to the far right, where the lower one, you can see that we are returning to what I would call pre-COVID numbers in terms of chronic absenteeism, and that trend continues to move in a positive direction. Our student performance results, as you saw during our last presentation, continue to be positive for us, both in overall performance but also in growth. And so, again, this presentation will be public, so others can view that at a more finite level if they choose to do so. Moving on to budget context, and I think this is a piece of information that is just really for public information. It's interesting, there was an article today, I think, that highlighted the difficulty in trying to truly calculate the per pupil expenditure given all of the various factors involved. With that said, it is still the only formula that districts have to rely on, but we do have to be cognizant of some of the factors that go within that. And you can see, compared to surrounding towns where Southington falls, we are slightly higher than Waterbury, but substantively lower than Newington, Berlin, Cheshire, and Wallingford. And as highlighted in today's paper, Meriden is lower. We don't receive the Alliance grant funds that a district like Meriden would receive. We don't receive the level of federal funds that a district like Meriden would receive. So this is the state share. The historical context in terms of our budget increases. I appreciate the support the town has shown the past several years with the increases that we've been provided. I think one of the challenges that I inherited back in 22-23 was really 2021 and 21-22. There is a period of time there that, that compounds, if you will, because your annual budget compounds based on, bargaining unit agreements and associated costs each year. And we are at a place now that the ARP ESSER funds are completely exhausted as of this past December of this year. And so that is not a source that we will be able to rely on any further. We used that for device purchasing. We used that for summer school tuition. We used it for summer school transportation. We used it to purchase reading, program materials that would have all otherwise been part of a proposed budget. So I think those funds were put to good use, and they were not reoccurring funds that relied on increases to our operating budget. The positions that were adopted with those federal funds post-COVID were all either reallocated as attrition occurred or eliminated, as we had indicated we would be doing. For public information, just a little bit about our process. We do start relatively early. It seems like we just start the school year and we start preparing the budget for the next fiscal year. And so we provide information to our administrators in terms of giving them time to gather their requests, and if need be, working with Mr. Romano or Mr. Fickle or Mrs. Mellett to get quotes relative to whether it's certain projects or equipment and what have you. We then host meetings with all of our administrators, and during that time, that's when a lot of, they're providing a lot of the justification and rationale or context for some of their requests. And then we end up meeting as a central office leadership team and deliberating further in order to get you to the number that you see this evening. So as I just shared with the timelines involved, from November 16th to the 30th, we moved into a central office phase of budget deliberations, and then finally, in the final month, myself, Mr. Pepe, and Mrs. Mellett continue to refine further if we feel there are competing demands and priorities, and we have to decide which to put forth. When you look at how we arrived at this evening's budget, When we started taking in all of the requests made by administrators, all major projects and equipment, and other associated line items, we started with a 9.85% increase. So getting to the 6.6, I figured this was a slide this year because these are questions that are often asked in the budget workshop, so I figured I'd try to save the board some of that time, but also inform the community as well what went into this. We know we need new staff for a variety of reasons. We know we need a teacher for personal finance at the high school because that's a mandated course effective for graduates of 2027. So that's 2,000 students that have to come through and take that course. When we weighed what could we otherwise find a way to get that teacher from the certification area that would be required to teach the course, it would mean eliminating several of the introductory courses that are integral to our pathways. And so, could you add a teacher? Yes, but would you be compromising your pathways to do that? Absolutely. And I think we're all in agreement that the pathways have been an important part of the high school's development over the past couple of years. With the teacher's contract, one of the key pieces of language that was agreed to, which I completely support, and quite honestly was surprised we didn't have it for years, upon my arrival to Southington, was that our elementary teachers receive a prep period every day. I did not know of a district around us that did not have that. The two prior districts that I worked in did have that. Our middle school teachers had that, and our high school teachers had that. Often I spend time with our teachers in small informal conversations or focus groups, and the number one need I heard expressed from our elementary folks was time. They consistently talked about how difficult it was to accomplish all the tasks that they needed to plan for and complete given the limited amount of time they received each day. So the language included adding a preparation period, which is going to be proposed as the addition of health coupled with PE to the elementary curriculum. So we're going to develop and expand that curriculum. That does require us to hire 5 health teachers in order to be able to comply with that contract language and give our teachers their prep period at the same time. There are tremendous benefits, I think we all agree, to giving students at the elementary age important portions of the health curriculum, but it also may present opportunities for us to double up at times as well if we cycle health and give kids an additional physical education period, which we understand the importance of exercise and physical activity right now, especially with some of the debates around excessive use of technology. But that was 5 teachers as well. And then when you look at other, I would say, related support staff requests, I think they were all justified, and we certainly would want to have brought them forward. But when you take all of the requests as a whole, you have to be mindful of what you can do through either addition or reallocation. We believe through a careful examination of class sizes at the elementary level and course offerings at the high school that we only need 2.4 staff, and that's relative to the shift in the middle school schedule. If you recall, a few years back, we eliminated these small teams in 6th grade at each middle school, and at the time that was due to enrollment. So the cut, although not popular with teachers for sure, was the one grade level where we saw the lowest enrollment, and it allowed us to stay within the board's guidelines for class sizes. But we were always very transparent that we knew when we did, even at the time we made that recommendation, we did an enrollment analysis and said, we're going to be back in 2 years asking for this back because the enrollment projections show that the middle school enrollment's going to recover and need those small teams. At the same time, the administration and curriculum office was studying some of our trends for student achievement, and while we're not disappointed in the achievement, we've realized relatively flat growth. And we looked at all the different work and initiatives we had done to this point, and one area that we were able to point to that we had not addressed was the amount of instructional time, or should I say reduction in instructional time, in the core academic areas that our middle school students currently receive. So as you saw at that recent board meeting where we presented a revised middle school schedule, instead of requesting the 6 teachers that we would have been requesting based on those reductions a couple years back, we are only requesting 2.4. Now you'll ask, well, okay, so you're not asking for 6, you're asking for 2.4. A lot of that comes from reallocation of existing staff. So as we need more than 2.4, we're able to get what we need from reallocation, and again, examination of attrition that's going to be occurring relative to these shifts. That's for the 5 elementary health positions, that's for all the middle school teachers, and that's for the personal finance. So instead of coming forward with 12 plus requests, we're coming forward with 2.4. So we tried to be cognizant of that to the best of our ability. Major projects and equipment, we're looking at multiple funding sources, but I'm hoping this board will entertain another conversation with our town officials around one-time expenditures. I think last year there was a suggestion that why are we building one-time expenditures into an annual operating budget that's just going to be annualized and compounded each year? And so we engaged with the Board of Finance, and it was ultimately supported by the town council, and those one-time expenditures occurred outside of the operating budget. They are minimal, as you can see. All of the major projects and equipment in total are $396,000. But when you're talking about a $123 million budget, $396,000 to maintain or supply 12 buildings, 6,200 students, and 1,200 staff members is not as absorbent at all. We had 5 vacant, non-certified positions that we have been carrying for some time. As you know, there's a labor shortage, and in some of the areas where jobs are posted and just not filled, my thought process is if we've been surviving this long at this point in the school year and they're not filled yet, then I believe there's positions that are ripe for elimination, because we've proven that right now that we're able to do without. A couple other bullets that were difficult for Mrs. Ballett and I, and one that I want to highlight is the excess cost reimbursement. We know we're supposed to get up to 81% in reimbursement, but after they take the average of what's remaining based on all of the town's claims or district's claims, usually you get around 70%. Mrs. Mellett was extremely conservative, and at that time that she and I were finalizing the budget, had budgeted at 60%. And I said, we've never seen 60%. I said, so let's adjust that to 65%. It is still a conservative estimate. I believe our last year around this time, our final payment was around 68%. Unfortunately, between when we presented you this budget and when the state shared with us our percentage, we're only going to be receiving 59%. So we're at 62 now? Okay, good. So we're still below the 65% we've budgeted for, and we're hopeful that some of that can be resolved this legislative session. And I'll share more with you about that in quite a bit of depth as we proceed through the budget process. I eliminated the proposed funding for summer school. Now, last year, that was a proposal that was brought forward to this board, and we agreed, and you saw Mr. Hinman present, the absolute benefit to our students in terms of the recidivism rate and the success rate of students who have that opportunity. But last year, we had to make the difficult decision to reduce summer school tuition and transportation expenses. So given that the board had already done that, and I already knew what the increase was that I was looking at, I made that decision to not bring that proposal forward. We did, I think one of the things that, and we highlighted this at our last board meeting, because of our in-district programs, we are able to collect some level of excess cost reimbursement for the students, not those that are outplaced, but those attending in our district. As we highlighted, though, you're only eligible to collect whatever percentage of the cost is over 4.5 times the amount of our per pupil expenditure. And so I'll give you an example that I had shared with one of our state legislators who's considering sponsoring a bill. One of our students, it costs about $81,000 change through our in-district program to educate. The threshold to be eligible for reimbursement is $83,000. So we will get zero reimbursement for that student based on the threshold. So one of the proposals is trying to see if the state might incentivize in-district programming and reduce that threshold from 4.5 times to 3 times per pupil allocation for in-district programs, which would come to about $55,000. And in that instance, we would actually gain back $19,000 for the education of that student in district. And so that's an example for you, just trying to share relative and context, if you will, to the excess cost bullets that are within here. Mrs. Mellett and I, she regularly attends the self-insurance committee meetings, and at the time of the budget preparation, we were left with the highest possible assumption that can be made relative to the premium cost years that we would have to operate. We took the liberty of assuming that that is not going to stay at that level through the entire budget process. It never has, and so we were able to reduce that line that we were budgeting by $150,000. We eliminated 3 buses, and to do that, we're certainly going to have to consolidate routes where possible, but that does allow us to keep operating with just about the same number of buses that we are currently utilizing this year. However, it does not allow us to expand routes if they were able to hire more drivers, which might provide more timely transportation for our families. But they've not been able to fill those routes with drivers to this point, and so we looked at our current numbers and what we're using and used that number for a reduction. The telephone line budget, we reduced by $50,000. We returned 4 teachers. If you remember, last year we tried to get 4 teachers into the operating budget that were funded through tuitions or expenses, I should say, that we charge to whether that's Waterbury or Hartford or whatever community we provide special education services to. They could be coming in through the Ag Science program, or they could be coming in through Open Choice. Last year we had to return them to the Nexus because it would have been an add of 4 teachers to our operating budget. And so again, this year, prior to putting that as part of our proposed budget, I automatically already returned it based on the board's direction last year to Nexus funding. And then we tried, a lot of it is nickel and diming at this point. Where we could, we made reductions of certain line accounts. Nothing substantive by any means relative to a budget as large as ours. I would say the one vacancy that we had was for $106,000 for a board-certified behavior analyst. And given that, again, that's been a vacancy, we decided we would forego filling that as part of the reduction process. And then lastly, various school supply lines. We kind of did a really close examination of what supply lines have historically we not expended the allocate amounts for. And then also considering where have we overexpended, and then what's the delta, if you will, that we can take in order to come to those numbers. When you look at some of the larger numbers associated with the budget, and so this was kind of the budget analysis I wanted to share with you. As we know, the major drivers are always the major drivers. That's not unique to Southington. That's every district in the state. Salaries and benefits are your 2 biggest drivers of operating costs annually. Purchase services, we're at a unique time, and I think you're all seeing it with purchase services, whether it's energy costs, the transportation contract, purchase services, everywhere. The cost to do business is more, and so that's an area that we saw an increase. Breaking it out to existing staff, we did want to highlight, again, we had the teachers contract, we had the food service contract, we had the secretary's contract, and we had the nurses contract. While the nurses contract, while those increases look substantive, if you will, again, remember, we're talking about 20 staff members, and when we were in collective bargaining with them, it was very apparent based on comp data that we were essentially amongst the lowest in Hartford County and amongst comparable surrounding towns relative to what we were paying our nurses. Healthcare is an absolute need area and shortage area, and it's important to retain the qualified staff that we have, and I'm glad the board recognized that. As I highlighted, requests for new personnel are minimal. It's the 2.4 that we would need to fill out the shift in the middle school schedule. And then there are only 2 other requests, which are nominal when you're talking about a $123 million budget. One is for advanced placement proctors for high school. We currently already incur these costs, but we don't budget for them. So we felt it'd be prudent to put that in the budget if we know we're going to incur them. And then one was a proposal that was brought forward by a couple of staff members. I had conversations with the athletic director about it. And I believe there's a real interest at Southington High School to start a girls golf program. When they were surveyed in terms of for student interest, there were over 20 female athletes that expressed an interest in a female golf team. The CIAC does endorse and sponsor girls golf at the interscholastic high school level, and many of the districts in the CCC conference have girls golf currently. And currently we only have boys golf. And so I was kind of proud of that one because as a dad whose daughter just recently discovered golf and loves it, I thought it'd be a nice opportunity for our female athletes who have expressed an interest, and I did not see it to be a substantive proposal. As we talked about within the insurance, I think Mrs. Mellett and I are fairly confident that these numbers, as the budget process progresses, will change. So we were working at the time off of the best information that we had at the time of the development of the budget. The student transportation budget, so as we talk about, this isn't just the New Britain transportation contract. This also includes special education transportation and transportation for our students under the McKinney-Vento Act, which are our students that are deemed homeless. And so there's the increase there that I was referring to in purchase services. And then lastly, as we talked about, is the special education outplace tuition and diagnostic center tuition. While this is an increase, I think it's important to know the cost avoidance that came with this increase. And that was highlighted for this board at our last meeting, and I will be sure to include that presentation on the website along with this budget presentation for folks to reference. Interestingly enough, I was reviewing the State Department of Education's legislative initiatives today, and they are proposing legislation to create a tuition schedule for private outplacement institutions, because right now it is unregulated, so we are at the mercy of the private institution to pass on whatever increase they propose for us each year. And that's leading in many instances to not only uncontrolled costs, but real difficulties in budgeting when you can't anticipate what the expected increase is going to be.
And Steve, just to clarify on that slide,
Yep.
it's actually a decrease to that line item overall. So it's going down because of the special ed excess cost and the other items that he referred to earlier. So just, I wanted to make sure it does say increase, but it's a negative, so it's
Gotcha.
going down.
Thank you. Nice correction. And then lastly, and I know, Mr. Savage is here this evening, or he'll be here Thursday. This board has invested heavily in our technology infrastructure dating back to bringing Tyler on board when he did a full assessment of our network and started to develop a cycle, if you will, to improve and protect our infrastructure. He's done a tremendous job. He has stayed the course every step of the way with what he says we need and what he's going to do. And that continues to give us a very reliable and protected network. And so we'll be prepared to answer questions you may have regarding the technology budget at that time. I know we discussed in some depth last year the technology replacement cycle, if you will. One of the, again, unintended consequences of our ESSER funds was we were able to use that first $1 million to get every student in the district at a time of need a device, but then there's no money following that. Now, I will say, Tyler, to his credit, has pursued 2 grants, both of upwards of $600,000 to $800,000, that have provided us relief in terms of asking for increases in the operating budget and allowed us to stay on a device replacement cycle. Those grants were only offered, if you will, with federal funds when the state had them through our ESSER funding. So those are not grants we can pursue any longer. There are some other grants that we do try to pursue, and Tyler is excellent at doing that. And I often pass on as part of my administrative report or weekly updates to the board grants that he is able to secure for us. This is a little hard to read, but we'll get more into depth in it, and it is in your book. Relative to the replacement cycle and the associated costs, it's just there to show what the plan is essentially and what the associated costs are with the plan in order to maintain our staff devices in addition to our student and devices, which is also captured here. Another area that we've discussed and I've shared with you during my updates to all of you is the uncertainty in federal funding. This is an extremely volatile area for us right now. This board, I know the Board of Finance or the Finance Committee has dealt with changes in entitlement grants that we've always received and shifts that we were not able to anticipate or budget for, and that continues to be a pattern of concern. We were notified that based on the most recent census data, our community wealth puts us and our poverty rate puts us at a point that we are going to be receiving less Title I funds than we were eligible for previously. The threshold that they use is 5%, and I believe we came in at 4.97%, was it? I don't want to misquote you. We were just under where we needed to be in order to hit that next threshold in eligibility for further Title I funds. Given the volatility and the inability to adequately predict or budget, we did not rely on any Title I funds as part of our budget presentation for this year because we can't be assured we're going to receive them. We've heard a lot of rumblings about the new administration and what they may be doing relative to education funding, and I think that gave us further pause given the volatility that we've experienced in the past few years.
And Steve, that slide, I reference the source for the poverty statistics on the U.S. Census. And to Steve's point, the Southington poverty is decreasing, which is good for our community, but it does impact the amount of grants that we get. And the current reporting shows us down to 4.4%.
4.4.
We're well under the 5%.
So from
threshold.
4.97 to 4.4.
And 2 years ago, we were at 5.0%. So just, we're concerned about the new year funding.
Additionally, I looked at the projects and equipment, which I alluded to as part of my reduction process, and I'm hoping to engage with our Board of Finance and Town Council for any of the one-time funding projects similar to what they were able to support last year without building it into the operating budget. And then lastly, just the timeline for the public's information. We're meeting this evening. Obviously, we'll start to do a dive into the budget. We plan on reconvening again Thursday evening at 7 o'clock back here. And then we'll be presenting our budget to the Board of Finance on February 12th at 6:30. And then they'll be announcing dates of their workshops where we are usually invited in, and they ask great questions about, you know, some of the rationale and some of the requests within our budget. And that's been a very collaborative process for the past several years. So other than that, one date I didn't put in there, and Madam Chair, I will defer to you on this one, is, you know, our next regular Board of Ed meeting where we would schedule the budget adoption or you know, would be January 23rd, which is next week. Last year, we chose to hold a special meeting after the governor released his budget because we wanted to be certain of that there wasn't any legislation in there that we needed to be aware of and planful for prior to taking action, right? And so while that helped us last year and we didn't need to make any substantive changes because that budget showed that there wasn't anything to be concerned about, you're all hearing about it and reading about it every day right now relative to what the governor's budget may be and what the legislation may be proposing. And I think we just want to be conscious of, do we want to take that approach again and wait until after the governor's budget, or do you want to do that on January 23rd? And I will leave that to you, not to decide right here and now, but more to point it out as something for this board to consider. Given the fact that this is not, last year we could have expected there not to be any substantive changes because it was the off year, if you will, for the biennial budget. Given that this is the on year, and there's a ton of legislation as we're seeing already being proposed, I think it might be prudent to take a wait-and-see approach before we make any decisions. But again, that is your decision. That concludes my presentation for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Medancy. Before we start, last year we didn't know what the governor was going to do. This year we really don't know. So the thought was we could have a meeting after the governor's, but, you know, a special meeting, I'll call a special meeting if you are all in agreement with that. So I just, you know, yeah. So we could, yeah, okay. Why we are set up the way we are, I mean, we come up with a budget and then the governor budget, so let's, okay. All right, so as we've done in the past, we have gone through the book. But before we do, Bob, did you want to wait till we got to whatever section? Okay, that's fine. All right. So what we're going to do is go through the book as we do, ask any questions that you might have, any comments, any concerns you might have about anything. We'll go through the book. hopefully, well, not hopefully, we will be done before 9. We'll see where the natural break is, if we have one, so that we can resume on Thursday. Is everybody good with that?
Sounds good.
Okay. So without further ado, we've all seen the letter, the intro, and the budget summary. A little warm in here, is it me? Let's see. Okay, so that's on page 5. Regular education, page 6. Are there any questions? On page 6.
Page 6, you said, Colin.
Page 6, yes. Regular education. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple. The para PD that was eliminated, is that something that's, I'm assuming it's not mandated PD?
So it is mandated.
Ooh.
However, we were able, when reviewing the paraeducator's contract, we were able to meet the 18-hour requirement within their contracted work days. Initially, we were anticipating that that might need to be additional pay, because it was also, part of that mandate is it can't be for the annual required training. It's additional PD. But since the required training for all of the topics is not annual anymore, they've now spread that out. That allows us to account for it within the days that they are contracted for, and so that is accounted for in their salary line item, which is why we were able to eliminate it from the PD account.
And you mentioned 5 non-certified positions eliminated. Could you just tell us what they were?
Paraeducators.
Paras, okay.
And a few ABAs also. We broke it out. They were all vacant positions that hadn't been filled.
Thank you.
So an ABA is an applied behavior analyst, and so it's essentially a para with advanced training in collecting behavioral data and working with students.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this page? All right. Regular education on page 7. Existing salaries, personnel, any question, or should we just move right over to page 8?
I have a question on page 8.
Okay.
It'd be line item 12,200 for teacher substitutes. In 23-24, I know we overran by like 2x. How are we tracking now on our 24-25 budget?
In the current year, we're going to have a similar spend in that line item. The offset to that is due to teacher vacancies that might be out there, teacher, any of the certified staff vacancies, the daily subs and the building subs are all in this account that you're questioning. So yes, we're seeing a similar over expenditure in those lines.
So is it fair to say, though, if it's offsetting vacancies, that would be an offset in cost, right? Because that's a salary we're not,
Correct.
okay.
Yes, and, but positions that, so I'll give you an example, my elementary principals I'm thinking about that are here right now. They're daily building subs, which are those positions that we hire for that they know they're coming 5 days a week and they have a
Right.
different rate of pay. Those vacancies at some level have existed at all of the elementary schools for the entire year. So while we budget for them in order to be able to hire them, we're not able to at this point, and so that's where the offset comes in.
Gotcha, okay. Thanks.
Any other questions on page 8 or page 9? Nope. Okay. Any questions on the rationales or the salary account explanations? On 10 and 11? No, Mrs. Garvey? Okay. Mr. Whitehead? No, you're good? Okay. Just want to make sure. I see everybody. Then moving right along to employee benefits, page 13. Increase of 13.81. So, moving along to 14 and 15. Are there any questions?
I guess just a question, I'm trying to recall, what was our health insurance increase last year? Where did we settle?
I would have to look that up and get back to you. I
Yeah,
think we
no-
started at 8.8% at this point, at this superintendent's version last year. But I can get that, and we could put that in the question grid.
Yeah, if you could.
It's spread over 3 different accounts, Jasper, if you recall. It's in the regular ed, in
Right.
the ASTE line, and also the special ed. So just, I can get that for you.
So just as a point of information, any of the questions you have, we're also doing what we've done in the past, keeping those questions in a running document. That will, if there's not an answer for you this evening, it will be populated by the next workshop. And that document is historically passed on to the Board of Finance, so they can see what questions may have already been asked and answered.
Did everyone get that today? Get that email with the grid, so you can ask the
I
questions?
saw it, yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Did you get it? Because you have email. Yes, okay. We did. Yes.
That is also a document that we post online in the budget section on the website, so that the public has access to those questions and answers as well.
Okay. So no questions on 14 or 15?
Well, I guess I just have a comment. Is in, I guess historically, this $2 million health insurance increase, I mean, I assume that's likely to come down a little bit? Because that seems,
We have a self-insurance meeting, I believe, next Wednesday. So that's usually, the budget that gets set by the self-insurance committee in December is almost considered the worst-case scenario, but they have to lock something in for us to proceed with our budget. And then we have another meeting next week where they will update the claims through a more recent period, and then they'll evaluate where they believe the budget needs to be.
okay. So realistically, this is, I mean, again, it could be a good or bad X factor as far as we're.
Right.
It could come
This
down.
could be a
We'll-
substantial.
Yeah, we'll continue to look at claims up through April. We've looked even, yeah.
And it could be another reason why waiting until after the governor's budget, if the
Right.
self-insurance rate is adjusted prior to you guys taking an action, you'll have, Mr. Bazuski, a concrete answer to that question, or at least a better answer.
I bet,
Gotcha.
there's never a
Yeah.
concrete.
Concrete is until the
because,
final
yeah,
number
it's
is, yeah.
Still, yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
any other questions regarding insurance? Okay. Any questions on the explanation of the employee benefits, or, no? Everybody good? Okay, purchase services. Moving over to page 18. Are there any questions on any of the services on 18 and 19?
I guess same question that we kind of talk about it every year, right? It looks like the electricity increase that you're asking here is, it's pretty low compared to what we've seen in past years. And I know that we locked in our rate. So we feel comfortable? I mean, are we kind of on that run rate?
We've received, if you recall, we locked in a new supply
Yep.
contract that went into effect during the November timeframe. We've only received one updated invoice from Eversource to reflect how that actually flows through the current year. I'm fairly confident with the current year number that we have. And what I did was work in a 5% increase on that line. We will be with the supply arrangement for the full 12 months in the new year. So it is always a hard to tie in number, but overall, I think we should be okay
Okay.
with this number.
Any other questions? I do have one question, the magnet school tuitions? Are we seeing a decrease? Is this,
So we, last year budgeted at the 58% of tuition. This year, the number of students enrolled in magnet schools was a little lower than we had budgeted in the previous year, so I brought it down just a small amount to reflect a change in enrollment rather than a change in tuition.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I don't think so.
You good? You good? You good? Everybody good? Okay. Any questions on page 20 and 21, rationales?
For 21, the district-wide computer hardware, the 5-year refresh, is that like the replacement cycle that we talked about last year with, does this include like the Apple to PC conversions and,
No, you'll see.
or is that a
the,
separate, or is that further?
You'll see that in the equipment section
Okay.
for the staff laptops and the
This is-
Chromebooks. This is the infrastructure, it's the infrastructure and the computer labs at the high school and the ViewSonics, I believe. And the slideshow that Mr. Medancy did show pointed out that the ViewSonics and the computer lab replacements were funded in a different source last year. The computer labs were funded using the non-lapsing fund, so they're not part of this budget. And then the smart boards were funded, I'd have to look at the slide, but they were I believe they were in the major projects and equipment.
Okay.
So it's moving them out of the major projects and equipment and into this computer hardware, which will be an ongoing line item. So we believe that these items are properly where they should be in the operating budget to support the 5-year plan that Mr. Savage has put together.
So the top line, I'm thinking correctly, is like the switches, the access points, things like that. They're on either a 5 to a 7-year replacement cycle, and it's all filtered out in there in the costs. And the computer labs are on a 7-year replacement cycle, but we're constantly trying to move away from them, just for the cost, since
Sure.
students have Chromebooks. But unfortunately, the apps haven't really caught up on the Chromebooks yet, so these are the 14 that we needed to keep, and there's 2 per year.
Okay,
And then the interactive displays, we're going on like a 8 to 10-year replacement cycle once we get on the plan, which we're close to.
okay, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Mrs. Carmody? I know it's data, because, and this is your area of expertise.
I know you like looking at me, but I don't have any questions at this point. I will have one coming up.
Okay, just checking when it,
Thank you.
Just one question.
sure.
So on the major projects and equipment, so on the summary page, Mr. Dancy stated it was eliminated, but we moved the line item. So it's, in fact, it's not eliminated, but
Cecil, that was the budget that was approved in the previous year. So those computer items that Mr. Savage brought forward were new to our operating budget in the previous year. So we put them on the major projects and equipment. And now you're right, there is nothing in the major projects and equipment, but these are operating expenses that we need to sustain the operation. So rather than putting it on a major projects and equipment, we're trying to build it into a regular line item that reflects the needs of the district. So you're right, it is moving from one account to another.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other questions on 20 or 21? Okay. How about 22 and 23? Any questions on that?
I'm sorry, you're on page what, 23?
22 or 23? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone have any questions? Okay. So none on there. How about 24 or 25? nothing new on these. Okay, you good? Then moving right along, nothing on 26 for anyone?
Can I go back to something?
Sure.
You sure? Thank you, Mrs. Clark, you're so thoughtful.
Is it a data question?
No.
Your area?
I want to go back to page 9, and I really apologize for doing this.
Page 9, okay,
If you don't mind.
all right.
I think I'm a little confused, Mr. Medancy, when we talked about the new, scheduling in the middle schools, okay? So I'm to understand that we're only going to have 2.4 teachers added in the middle school?
Yes.
So that means that we are replacing what we got rid of last year? No, because we got rid of how many last year?
No, because ultimately, we're going to be moving to 9 teams with the new model. And even in the previous model, when teams were eliminated, there was 8 teams. There was the 2 small teams, but there was a split team in 7th and 8th grade. So the add is in addition, those 2.4 is to create the 9th team. So we have the 4 core subjects areas, the team's evenly divided by number. But while it required more than 2.4, we looked at the change in our course offerings, our electives, and looked at what staff FTEs we would gain from those changes, which makes up for the remainder of the needs relative to that 2.4.
But my concern is, and it's the same concern I had last year, and I think all of us here did, that we are making certain that we are targeting those students that need that extra care in the middle schools. This will do that. I have to be absolutely positive about that because I have heard from so many middle school teachers and parents that that was a concern. So I want a reassurance that that is going to happen.
The new schedule that we plan to implement next year increases the academic teachers' contact time
Okay.
enormously. Now, that time has to come from a certain place. That comes from the on-course subjects.
Right.
So the rotation changes, the offerings don't change. They have the same experiences. But we reclaim time from the on-course subjects and filter them into the content area subjects in order to infuse more teacher contact time.
So, okay, so I'm reassured about that from my own satisfaction. Are we then going to be losing teachers in the middle school?
So when we go back to 2 years ago, when the enrollment dropped, and we reduced 6 teachers, 3 at each school, we knew that based on the enrollment projections, that for next year, we were going to have to reinstate those 6 teachers to handle the increased enrollment. With the new schedule, instead of an ask of 6 teachers, it's 2.4, because we're able to reallocate, because there are reductions in certain areas, and we're adding back in. The delta, instead of 6, is the 2.4.
The amount of FTEs essentially increases by 2.4 overall to the operating budget, but who is in which FTEs is what changes.
Could I just add, my understanding is if we had not changed the schedule, it would have been 6.
Right.
So that would have been those 6 people roughly.
Yes.
Correct.
By changing the
Correct.
schedule and who does what, it's not the 6 anymore.
Correct.
Correct.
It does make sense. I just want to make sure that we're comfortable that we are meeting the needs of, that we did not meet last year, that we did away with. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks for letting me go back to that. Thank you.
that's fine. Okay, page 27. Total supplies, books and materials. 28, 29. Any questions on any of these categories or line items?
How could the oil heat go down?
Switch to gas.
Help all of us.
The oil heat gets locked in at a future contract, and I think last year and the year before, we were dealing with some wars overseas, so we were able to lock in at a slightly lower amount.
that in our houses?
Not my house.
Any other questions on any line items?
No.
I
No?
do have one more. I see
Okay.
that, it's okay, the textbooks are going down.
Of course.
I remember it used to be when we transitioned from paper books to online, they charged fees. Is that still going on, or are they?
Yes, it's what's called an e-license, but they're not annual charges for most of the textbooks. Many of them, it's either a 3-year, 5-year, or 6-year, depending on what you negotiate with the publisher at the time of purchase.
So I would assume a paper book, which would wear out, is not true anymore of online. They don't wear out.
Correct.
Okay.
But we did agree that we were gonna keep at least one set of textbooks for each course.
class.
Yes,
that kids-
where a textbook existed for that course or class, yes.
Okay.
I think one of the things that Mrs. Riccio highlighted about some of the, and it was in a curriculum and instruction committee meeting, some of the, when you're with the online textbook, how they're able to update it in real time relative to current events that are going on or interactive multimedia, links and things like that embedded within the online version. But yes, you are correct at that point. A textbook set would be available.
Any other questions on 28, 29? No? Yeah, yeah.
So athletic supplies, middle school, athletic supplies, high school, athletic uniforms, so 46,500, 46,600, and 46,700. So with those, is that replacement, is that like just rolling replacement similar to, kind of as needed, we replace athletic supplies, or, and just out of curiosity, have we looked into potentiating that into like a public-private partnership where, again, local businesses could potentially like help to sponsor our teams, and just, again, it's just like moving forward, it's sort of like, I understand that we have to provide some level of funding for like referees and things like that, but I didn't know if we.
So I think one of the things we learned a few years back when middle school sports was eliminated is there's a initial level of support that the community wants to provide, because nobody wants to see that go away. We all agree that it's good for kids to have those extracurricular activities and to be involved in clubs. One of the challenges that I observed for the the parent group that became part of the Middle School Sports Association was sustaining that commitment year over year.
Yeah.
And they did a tremendous job with what they were, tasked with. But the initial donations didn't become annual donations that they could rely on. And that's what posed the challenge, which in turn, I think, led the board to reinstate middle school sports because they saw it was difficult, given the amount of funding overall that was required.
There's also a few sports where the uniforms are not returned, specifically gymnastics, leotards, the swimming, bathing suits. So those are annual costs that won't, there's no way to avoid that
Gotcha,
in our operating budget for those sports.
thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so any questions on 30, 31, 32, or 33? Which is just an explanation of those line items. Everybody good? Okay, moving right along to page 34. Equipment summary.
So this is 35. This is where we see the actual device replacements we were talking about. Question I have is we had factored in last year, and it looks like it's the same this year. Year over year, you've assumed like a 4% cost escalation, right, for equipment?
Yes.
Have you seen quotes recently? I mean, does 4% seem adequate?
So right now, these are pretty accurate to what we've quoted out this year for the purchases.
Okay.
So yeah, basically, we worked to get down last year around this time with switching to the PCs and everything like that. And when it did come in originally, it was higher. But we, worked through it and said we went through all this last year and in good faith, they came back down where they should be.
Okay.
And we are also actively positioning multiple different vendors against each other just to get the best
Sure.
product and deal for the district.
Okay.
Those are good numbers. Any other questions regarding equipment?
One
Diesel.
quick question. I saw earlier in the budget, you mentioned E-rate. Does that only apply to the actual, the cost of the, I guess the cell service? Or is it applicable to devices as well?
So the funds that might have been mentioned, there was a couple different ones, like ARP ESSER type things. Like when we went through the devices, there was a thing called ECF and the ARP ESSER that were both like that one-time thing, and we were able to get devices and hotspots and things like that for the students and staff. When it comes to E-rate, it is one of the E-rate categories is just like access points, switches, all that level of things, and at 50% off is our E-rate. The other one is like a firewall and those types of things, an internet service, like our WAN connection to the internet. So yeah, the devices are not, like student-teacher devices are not in that, unfortunately.
Very good.
They keep trying to, there's a bunch of programs going on to get security more involved in E-rate, and we've actually applied for one of them. There's two actually, and one of them, unfortunately, there was so much demand that we weren't chosen. But we're applying for another one right now through a security type grant that we're hoping gets rolled into E-rate. So it'll be more like that. I think years ago we went into the EDR and like virus protection. They're hoping to roll that into an E-rate program, but it's in its infancy.
So just, I'm curious, so the E-rate, it's a federal program, right?
Yes.
So how do they go about determining how to dole out those funds? Is it based on demographics or otherwise? And in other words, does Southington have the same opportunity as other districts in order to apply for some of these E-rate programs?
So we all have the opportunity to apply. I think it's a 3-year period or a 5-year period. You get a chunk of money. Like this is how much money you can utilize via E-rate. And that gets reassessed, I think, every 3 to 5 years. And what determines the amount there and then the amount we get off, which is 50%. Other districts get 80, some districts get 40. That's dependent, I think, on your free and reduced lunch numbers. So that's kind of how that determination happens, like what percentage your district's on the hook for versus the government or the federal.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? No? Okay, moving right along. Other objects. Dues and membership fees? Any questions? Okay. Special projects. Okay.
Clean section.
It's a very clean section, very clean section, 0. Okay. And special budgets. Summer school, continuing ed, ag
Yeah,
sci.
Could we
Yep.
just have a little clarification? You mentioned the cut in the summer school. What was cut and what still remains?
So the last few years with ARP ESSER funds, we were able to offer essentially two tracks of summer school, enrichment and remediation.
Right.
And so enrichment was typically a pay to attend.
Right.
And remediation was where we were able to invite students who might have been deemed at risk based on academic performance, and then credit recovery. And so our experience and why we proposed it in the budget last year was that sometimes there's an associated demographic with need relative to some of the academic performance. And so you could invite students to attend, but you couldn't require it if it was only remediation and not credit recovery. And if the family couldn't afford it, then they chose not to attend. There's times where if we do pay for the whole thing, they still don't attend because it's not on them to put something forth, and so there's not an investment in attending. We've seen it work both ways, both for us and against us. The district prior to COVID always had a nominal fee associated with it. I want to say it was like $50 or $100. It didn't cover all of our costs, but at the time, Mr. DeStefano was the summer school director, and the costs were offset by the enrichment margins. So that essentially is what we were able to do with the federal funding. It has never been part of the operating budget.
And just out of curiosity, for my own, the summer school jumpstart, how many students are we talking about? I don't need to know tonight,
Okay.
if
we'll
you don't
add
have it.
100.
Huh?
We'll add it to the.
Okay,
group.
thank you. If you, yeah, I'm just curious to see how many our children are using it. Okay, any other questions?
It was a nominal increase, but looking at the ag sci increase, that's all tied to the health insurance, which again goes back to the discussion from before, right? So that could go either direction. Got it.
Hopefully down. Down is a very good direction to go. Okay. All right. Next section is special ed. Do we have enough time to get through this? Yeah, I guess we could. Okay. Special ed summary. Any questions? Okay. Then looking on pages 44 and 45. Just, if I may ask, on 83129, BCBA and ABA therapists, could you please explain their roles? Just so that everyone, because when people see the word therapist, sometimes they think of, yeah, if you could just explain for us,
I'll
please.
defer to Dr. Cavallaro.
Okay, Dr. Cavallaro.
So our BCBAs are board certified behavior analysts, and they function mainly for our students who are in our programs for children with autism and or behavioral dysregulation and needs. So those professionals provide assistance to the team in data collection, in analyzing the data, in looking to develop behavior plans for students, and really overseeing the work of the ABA therapists. And therapists could be a misleading word, but essentially these are the professionals that are working with students, and they're collecting the data for the BCBAs, and they are applied behavior analysts. So the word therapist is attached to that, but they are working directly with children, they're running programs, they are assisting them in their day-to-day tasks.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You have a question?
What are we on, which page, 44? Yeah, I've got a question.
Okay.
Line items 83335 and 83336. Sorry, 332 and 335. That's the in-town transportation and the out-of-town transportation. The increases here are pretty substantial, and I see in the notes it was, we said it's based off of the anticipated new contract. How much of that cost is truly deemed to the new contract, and are we seeing an increase in also just need for that service? Like, do we have more students that now are using the service? Is there cost associated to that we're forecasting, or is it truly solely just based on the cost of a new contract?
It's based on the cost of the new contract and any identified students through the end of December that we have on the out-of-town placements. So if you recall, in the spring, Mr. Fickle did an RFP for special education transportation. So these line items are a combination of, I'm not gonna say privately placed transportation, but it will be part of the big transportation contract that we're currently awarding, along with the kind of mom and pop drivers that take some of the special ed students to the outplaced locations. So it's a combination of need, and Mr. Romano's office looks at all the current routes, and you'll see the percentages between the different line items for transportation varied, and it's basically, we're trying to break it out into the correct category and reflect the new contract along with any special ed routes that will be awarded outside of that.
Okay, and then the other question I have is that for the out-of-town transportation in 23-24 budget, we overran. Well, we overran for in-town, but we underran for out-of-town. What, just, I don't need it today, but could we see the run rate on kind of how we're tracking to this current budget? I think it's just a good data point as we kind of forecast next year.
Right, and I think another piece of what Mr. Romano and I tried to do with this current budget was to put the money in the line item to properly reflect or more accurately reflect the usage in those accounts. So to your point, if we ran all of the transportation lines together, we could provide that for you as to where we are in the current year versus where we're anticipating.
Okay.
And in total, these lines make sense together. There's some in the regular ed and these two in this special ed. So that was part of our endeavor this year, to put things in the proper account.
Makes sense.
Any other
I
question?
got a question.
Yep.
So page 45, 83370 out-of-town tuition. So one of the concerns that I have is the 2023-24, what was budgeted, what was expended. We had about a $600,000 swing to the positive. And then the 24-25 budget, where we kind of split the difference, and now we're proposing, you know, a $322,000 reduction. How are we on track as of this year? And again, I guess add it to the grid, but how are we on track for this year? And, you know, are we potentiating another situation where, again, like we're essentially going to cut that number, but ultimately we run the risk of, you know, getting whacked again?
I think that was part of what Mr. Medancy was trying to share, that we were trying to be conservative, and then we did increase the reimbursement rate that we thought the state would be offering regarding, this is one of those special ed excess cost
Gotcha.
line items. So we know currently what students are here, and what, there's a December 1st filing that the special ed office enters at the state, and based on that, we recently, just last week, they told us what our reimbursement rate is, and it's only gonna be 62% in this current year.
Gotcha.
So we did allude to the fact that we may be leaving ourselves slightly short on that, because we reduced our, we increased the reimbursement rate to think we were gonna get 65%, but currently what we're tracking in the current year is 62%, which, to Mr. Medancy's point, it's the lowest it's been from the state, so.
But as far as, you know, so it's strictly reflected by that number. It has nothing to do with the fact, you know, again, if we were able to, like, bring a student back in district, or if a student essentially aged out of, you know, what we have to cover.
And that is part of the reduction.
Okay.
The special ed office went through every student and tried to identify those that would be aging out, and those that they may be able to bring back into our schools here.
Gotcha.
So that was the initial part of the analysis, and then also taken out of that line was the 65 versus the 60 reduction we were just talking about, along with the internal excess cost grant revenue that would be generated through our in-district programs. That reduction got taken out of this out-of-town tuition line item. So it's a combination of us recognizing our in-district programs and the revenue. We base the 240,000 on the actual that's occurring in this current year, and that is at the 62% reimbursement rate. That's how much revenue is being generated from the excess cost at the state. So there's a lot of pieces that go through there. That's the
Right.
tuition that we're paying out, and then it's offset by any grant revenue that comes in. So to your point, in the previous years, if we have a student that is not identified in December/January this year when we're doing the
Planning it,
budget,
right.
and then they're outplaced in the fall, that's not part of our budget. So, based on the reimbursement from the special ed excess cost and any changes in the student population, there's a lot of things that go into that line item.
I would just say there's one other factor that definitely needs to be considered, but gives me a little bit of confidence with adjusting that from 60% upwards to 65%. And that's that there was quite a bit of fuss made 2 years ago when the state budget was finalized, that the State Department of Education did not give the legislature the proper numbers that they would need relative to the amount of funds that would be needed for excess cost reimbursement to reach the tiered levels that are legislated. And last year, there was every effort to try and amend that and try to make a correction to it, because we knew if they didn't, it would lead us to exactly what's happened today. That they now have to divide the pie even further, and now they're dividing amongst districts with a smaller pot or underfunding, if you will, which is what led us to get the 62%. In the biannual budget that's going to be proposed, and I know is heavily invested in excess cost as far as legislative priorities go. I keep track of the bills that are being proposed right now, and there are multiple bills across the legislation on both sides, and the House and in the Senate, around excess cost and trying to get it to proper funding levels. So given that we knew they underfunded 2 years ago and there was so much push to properly fund, I think 60 to 65 is a safe number.
And then my only other ask is, I would assume that there's a number of students that essentially would be, like, account for this category. Could I request that we have that? And again, not so much, not for anything other than just to show the level of swing that could happen, because I imagine that this isn't a large number of students.
Correct.
So, again, and this is a number that accounts for over 1.5% of our entire proposed operating budget.
Correct.
So,
We will add that to the grid, but we believe there's about 55 students in that line item that are out-of-town tuition for special ed.
thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Am I hearing that the state changes the rate during the year?
Yes.
Based on what?
How much money they have left.
Bob, this.
So it's
Wind's blowing
two
that way.
factors. That obviously, the state doesn't know what each district is going to put forth in terms of claims for excess cost,
Sure.
because we don't always know who we're going to be, placing that qualifies for excess cost. So it's the unknown of the size or level of claims that they'll receive. But then it's essentially, I'm going to use a simple example for simple math's sake. If they should have budgeted at $100, so we each got our $70 in terms of 70%, but they only have $80 in their budget, so we're only going to get 70% of $80, not 70% of $100. And that's where that underfunding came back to get us this year. Good question, though.
Okay, anybody else have a question? I have just one question about the preschool. How many students do we have now, and with what is going on with preschool for next year?
So are you speaking relative to the integrated
It-
preschool overall, or the kindergarten age
The
legislation?
kindergarten age and the impact on preschool and,
So last year, when we screened our students, I want to say it was roughly, and I don't want to be misspeak, but I'm going off recollection, there were about 91 students that were screened or requested a waiver. And out of those 91 students, there were 7 that did not receive a waiver. So I don't know that it necessarily swung our enrollment very heavy. Now, we don't know how many more students may have been part of our kindergarten enrollment that just didn't request a waiver and chose not to come, which could have increased the enrollment. The other part that we are cognizant of is we are now at the age, if you will, of COVID, post-COVID, 2021, 22, where students are eligible for kindergarten. And so we are watching those enrollment trends very closely, because we know from the birth rate data that the Early Childhood Collaborative shared with us, those 2 birth years were larger than
Bumper crops.
previous and have been larger than post. And so there could be a bump in enrollment there that we have to be careful of.
Just for the record, we ran our first set of screenings this past Saturday.
oh, okay. Any other questions? So nothing on 44, 45. Explanations are on 46 and 47. 48 and 49. 50, 51. Wow. I got through it all. Major projects and equipment. That's a good one. I just have one comment myself on 54 and 55. I'm curious as to the 1998-99 request, as well as the 2003-2004 request. Just sharing that, if you look at the date of the request on the left side, some at the high school are 2003 and 2004. Just saying, yeah. And they're gonna be proposed for 26, 27.
They've been around a while. Been around a while.
Yeah, been around a while.
So
Indeed.
Colleen, I would like to point out on page 54 that the rekeying of all interior locks at the high school, we did fund year one in the current year that we're in. So there is a bucket of $20,000 that we're working with to rekey some of the doors. So this request here is years 2 through
Okay.
beyond in order to improve the key system at the high school.
There's only a 20-year-old request, in other words. Okay, good. Good to know. Okay, any questions on any of these? We still have that annual PCB monitoring.
I remember that.
Yes, we all do. We all do.
So you'll recall there was a slide about the one-time funding. We'll bring an exhibit to you on Thursday evening to continue that discussion because the PCB monitoring is required annually. And at this point, we removed it from the operating budget and put it on the one-time request for funding. So it didn't go away, but we'll have that conversation on Thursday. I'm sure we can share the exhibit before the meeting on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions? Questions? No? So nothing on 54, 55? Any questions or comments on 56, 57? Seeing none, 57, 58 and 59. Any questions on any of these? Yeah, Jaya?
Just one, yeah, when we talk about vehicles that are in condition as of October 24, and we list several of them in poor condition, can you explain what poor means? Is it a safety issue? Is it a aesthetic issue?
We reach out to the maintenance foreman, and he provides information to us regarding the mileage and the condition of the vehicles. I think we use our vehicles until we're very practical, I'll just say that. We did it.
We are
If you-
frugal.
If you recall the
mail-
capital plan that we sent to the town, we did include a maintenance vehicle on there as well as a special ed van. Last year, we were successful in obtaining the one-time funding through the capital plan to replace one of the vehicles. So it is a situation that, Mr. Romano's, it's near and dear to his heart, and we've brought many proposals over the years to continue the replacement cycle. So we try to prioritize the ones that are in most need and most used, and that's what you're seeing there.
So we talk about that a lot in finance, and we've done some things with that. I'm just curious, when we say poor, though, are we talking in any issue, safety issues of driving a vehicle that we shouldn't be driving?
So looking at the chart where it says reason for replacement, the 99 Ford
Yep.
pickup is reasons 1, 2, and 3 on the corresponding page, page 59. It says replace for safety, replace for high mileage, and replace because trade-in value is now less than a quarter of the cost.
Right, so we have one that's listed that has number 1 in it. So, but we're still driving that?
We do have an operation of vehicles line item, and we do maintain the vehicles through a local garage, so they are being inspected and reviewed. So I don't believe that there's a safety issue for the employee that's driving the vehicle, but it's a great question.
I think back to the mail truck that was finally retired last year, which was a repurposed vehicle that we inherited from the town, that it ran until it didn't. And then the town thankfully loaned us a car last year until we were able to secure a replacement vehicle. So, yeah, I think the point that we run them as well and long as we can. But to your point in terms of making sure that the safety is addressed.
And I believe that is the vehicle that is targeted for replacement on the capital plan.
I do have a question about the previous page, the relocking of the doors in the high school. I thought we had originally said that was a safety issue, but I see we're doing it in stages over a number of years. Is there a safety concern that in an emergency you have a number of different keys necessary?
No, we do have the ability to lock down on a moment's notice should we need to. I think more of the challenge is coming out of a lockdown in terms of the various key sets that exist because of the system being built over time. So the goal was to get them on the same key set so that, let's say you had multiple staff members that were able, because our staff is trained that you don't get, nobody's going to make an announcement over the PA system and say you can come out now, right? And so you have to be, it'll be announced and you will be keyed out of the classroom by the proper authorities. And so one of the goals relative to the safety committee was it shouldn't take just as long to come out of a lockdown as it was to be in a lockdown, because that could be equally as traumatic for kids because they don't know that it's all clear. They're waiting to be, if you will, keyed out. And so getting all of those cylinders on the same system has been the goal. But we do have the ability to lock all doors and lock down immediately should we need to.
So the rekeying is more for like interior doors more so than like exterior doors then?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Okay, do we have?
No, we're all set.
I just want to clarify one thing, and we do not put unsafe vehicles on the road.
No.
You're concerned and I'm concerned as well. This number one, to me, if it's unsafe, then our staff should not be driving it.
So I can't speak to whether this is actively used right now,
Okay.
but I would also say that if
We own it, but
if
that
there's a
doesn't-
recommendation to replace, it's because they are
Yeah,
fearful
okay.
that it is or is going to become a safety concern, and that's why there's a request to replace a vehicle in the capital plan.
Okay,
So who checks that?
the garage. So whoever, the local garage.
Who checks that? Pete?
You want to speak to the vehicle fleet maintenance?
I don't know. Who
He checks it.
It's got good rubbers.
If you let him,
and it
Mr. Pepe
stops.
will.
If
He's
it-
been known to dabble
if it
outside of his wheelhouse.
Goes on and it stops, yeah, no.
Yeah, but
Pete, do you do the oil changes and check everything? I don't know. Who checks it?
This is what
That's a
there
good
was
question.
garage here, if you wanna. It's the top one.
Yeah, so, this is a vehicle that's used by the laborers. It's safe at the current time, and we do continue to maintain it, but with time, it's gonna become a safety issue. And as you know, what we're talking about for budget right now isn't approved until a while. It isn't until July 1. And then when we go to order it, we don't get it till the next year because it's on the state contract. So we have to think ahead. So when if they put a 1 to it for safety concern, it's going to be a safety concern. And if it gets to that point, obviously, we will not drive it. The laborer is not allowed to drive it. But it is something we look a little bit in advance. And again, it's a 1999 Ford F-250.
That was a good year for Ford.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a 1999 Mazda B3000 that's still on the road.
You know, and it probably has a lot of rust on it, but it's just surface rust. We are always taking care of the tires, brakes, and the motor. It's not that it's unsafe at the current time, it's just, it will become a problem eventually.
And Pete, they don't travel any large great distances, it's within this system, right?
No, we stay within the town with most vehicles. There are times when they have to make a trip to the supply house in another town. We're probably not taking that truck. We don't want that to represent Southington.
Thank
We
you.
don't need that, thank you. All right, are there any other questions
No.
regarding any of
It's our
these?
pedal truck.
It's called getting old, Colleen, just would like.
I would,
I just
yeah.
would like to mention that.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Carmody.
You're welcome.
Okay, how about on page 60 and 61? Carpet replacements,
No.
flooring, painting. Okay, testing. PCB monitoring, my favorite, at the middle schools. That annoys me.
Drop off.
You know, that just is so just,
We could end here, you know.
huh?
We could end
Yeah,
here.
no, well, we're just about,
Well, yeah, but then we could do it on
Oh.
Thursday, because I have a lot of questions on one page.
you have a lot of questions on which page?
Yeah,
The grants?
On page, hang on, 63, I think it is.
Okay, because that's,
I want to talk about some grants.
okay.
We're not there yet, right?
No,
Can be if you
we
want.
can be, because there's
Well, thank
nothing,
you, Joe, how kind of you.
because there's nothing, the non-lapsing accounts,
No, there's nothing.
there's nothing there now. Zero. So let's go to 63, and Mrs. Carmody,
Okay.
tee it
so
up.
I may speak?
Yes, you
Take it
may.
away.
So much.
Why am I being nice to her?
Do we, Steve, do we have still a grant writer?
We don't have one that we staff full-time. We do have one that we pay hourly per diem when we ask them to either investigate, pursue, or complete a grant application.
Because
A
we
lot
used to have one, right? We used to have a specific grant writer.
Yeah, it was always the same arrangement. She was paid hourly. She was not a full-time staff member. She was a retired paraeducator, actually, that person. And so, yes, we have a person that's got grant writing experience. A lot of the entitlement grants, you don't necessarily need a grant writer to apply for. And even, I would say, for most of the grants that Tyler has gotten, he maybe at times has used assistance, but a lot of them he's completed on his own. And I think for the most part, we're completing most of the grant applications on our own now.
Well, because there was an article in AARP, which I belong to, which was talking about how there are not grants being given like there used to be. I mean, I can remember, I think it was Chris Bollinger was our grant writer, do you remember that?
Correct.
I remember.
And we
Yep.
used to get tons of money, Steve, and there were so many grants. Now, Tyler is getting most of our grants for our technology, but there aren't the number of grants out there that there used to be anymore, right? Am I right about that?
Correct, and I would say one of the big shifts that I've noticed in the past, 5+ years in central office is that a lot of the competitive grants, you have to have certain
Right,
demographics or
criteria.
characteristics, whether it's
Right.
your poverty rate, whether it's your level of free reduced lunch, whether it's the number of multilingual learners. So we often don't qualify for the
No,
competitive
because of our
grants that
district,
are being
right,
offered.
Exactly. So it's because, economically, because of our district, we do not qualify for these grants.
It's partially, I think it's both. I think you spoke to it. A lot of the private associations that would offer grant
Right.
opportunities, the philanthropy, if you will,
Right.
that's been reduced, but also the entitlement grants have been reduced.
Okay, thank you. I was just concerned about that, because we used to really, through the 18 years that I've been here, we used to get a lot of money in grants. Yeah, you remember all the money we got.
Yeah, and I don't want to misspeak because I remember Chris Belanger. I only worked with her for a year or two when I was assistant superintendent. Prior to her, she had moved down to Florida. She may have been a retired teacher or paraeducator. I'm not completely sure.
Retired teacher.
Retired teacher. Okay.
Know her well.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anybody
That's all
else?
I have, Mrs. Clark.
I thought you had lots of questions.
That-
Anybody?
That was a big question, don't you
It was
think?
kind of disappointing, I thought.
That's enough, Joe, don't start.
Anyone else have any questions? Could I just ask about the, where is it? The Ag Sci grant?
What page are you on, Colin?
I'm still on 63.
Top of the page or bottom of the page?
BOE reoccurring grant revenues,
Ah.
right below adult ed. Why is that in two? Just out of curiosity.
there's no.
Why is that in 2 lines? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what is the ed reform, education reform, I'm guessing?
So this is also, it's similar to the magnet schools where we're only allowed to charge 58% for tuitions, and that extended to agriculture science programs.
Okay.
The state is giving the 58% in a different manner than was anticipated. So this is a line item that is coming to us at the town level, but it should be I'm representing it here under the board level. And it's basically to make up for the 58% tuition limitation,
Remaining 42%.
the remaining 42%.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
And that is something that is probably being addressed at the legislature
As we
for the
speak.
new year.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? It's a first.
Are you looking at me?
Yeah,
I
I'm
am.
looking.
Are you looking at me?
I am.
Okay.
You should.
I just want to say, this is the first time I think we've gotten through the entire book.
Yes, our superintendent did a
Yes, he
wonderful
did.
job.
And staff, superintendent and staff, excellent job.
I'm hoping that we are able to get what we need. I see that we have some members of our town council here this evening, I believe.
Yes.
Town Council and Board of Finance.
And Board of Finance?
So, thank you for being here and listening to us. That's all I have.
Any if you have any questions, send it on the grid.
We
Yeah.
we'll work on the grid and
Okay.
we'll be prepared Thursday evening to further discuss any of the questions that you guys have relative to that
Thank you.
information.
I'm sorry?
I put 3 on already.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's, if you
And
have
Mr.
questions.
Mr. Fickle has been in the audience here
It's been long.
jotting down all the questions as we were discussing them. So when you go in, there's more than your 3 questions, but feel free to add them to there, especially before Thursday, so that we can have the answers
No
ready for
pressure.
you.
No pressure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and I'll see you Thursday night.
Thank you.
Except for Mr.
Except for